there is a coherence to a large section of the reform vote, which can be traced all the way back to the early UKIP years. But it is a coherence on one of what we might call the sort of two fault lines of politics today, the two dimensions of division. You've got an economic dividing line in terms of free markets versus the state, redistribution versus letting people keep their money, etc., etc. And then you've got a social values divide, which is nowadays you're talking about things like woke, but it's also immigration, national identity, attitudes to social change more generally. Reform are very coherent on that second dimension. They are the people who, like William F. Buckley, want to stand athwart history and yell stop. They don't want immigration. They don't want social change. They want to go back to traditional values. They believe in traditional identities and all this kind of stuff. And you plug in any of those kind of measures into your little statistical model, and it'll come out as a strong predictor of being a reform voter. So they are very coherent in that space, but they're very incoherent in the other space in terms of economic values. There was a really nice report recently done on the reform curious amongst Labour voters, who obviously like of considerable interest to the governing party at the moment, and they tend to be quite left wing on public sector stuff. They basically want the public sector to work better and they want to spend more money on it. Whereas the core reform voters are the opposite. They're often quite free markety, and you also see this in terms of the reform activists and politicians. They tend to be often quite Thatcherite Tories of origin, whereas the average reform voter is often they're often people who are like, I wish the state would work, but I don't think it does. So they would be in favour of spending more money on the state if they thought it would work. But they're definitely not ideologically small state or anything like that, which actually puts them at odds with the politicians that they're electing. So this is one of the interesting questions for reform going forward. Now they're a big player. Now they're potentially going to be talked about as, a party of opposition, a potential party of government. That inconsistency, that fault line on one of the major, divisions in terms of what government should do and how it should do it, will that get exposed? Will that get scrutinised? And what impact will that start to have on their support if it is?